Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. I'm not sure what episode number this is going to be yet because I want to spring this on you and surprise you a little bit with it. But of course, I'm Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very special guest, longtime game developer, a man who founded a studio in Japan. Lots of questions about that, although I think I've picked your brain about that in the past. Progenitor of the PixelJunk series we knew so well on PS3, etc., etc. Q Games' director, founder, Dylan Cuthbert. Dylan, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. All the way from Kyoto.
Yes, Kyoto, yes.
How's life? How's everything going?
It's great, thanks. It's pretty good. We're all slowly coming back into the office,
Good.
after the whole Corona thing. Well, It's
Yeah.
not after it yet.
Awful. So,
Yeah.
So this is funny. I was talking just briefly before we started the show. I had seen you last, and I'm sure you probably don't remember. You talked to a lot of people, but I saw you at one of my visits to TGS. We talked about the Tomorrow Children.
Okay.
And I interviewed you like just at TGS, but in the hall, like before it opened. We were just sitting at a table, and I found you really fascinating. And I was sad that I had left IGN at that point, or just a little while later, because I had kind of stopped doing journalism, as it were. And I'm glad now that we have Sacred Symbols and we're doing this again, I can kind of get back into these sorts of things and talk to you and pick your brain. Now, you're really illustrious, and I don't know that a lot, especially of our younger audience, knows exactly how long you've been around and where you've been. I mean, talk about Argonaut and PlayStation and obviously Q Games over the last 20 years. So before we get into everything, because obviously we want to focus on the PlayStation stuff, and we will do that. And of course, I want to talk to you about what you're doing now. But tell everyone, where you come from and kind of some of the games you've worked on, because I think it might surprise some people, some of the amazing titles you've actually worked on in the past.
Okay, well, I kind of started making games when I was about 10, back on the Sinclair Spectrum in the UK, just like hobby, just playing around with stuff, learning how to program, that kind of thing. And then at about the age of 17, I thought, okay, screw this. I'm going to quit school and I'm going to go into the games industry. I'm going to make games professionally. And I sent applications to several companies, and I wanted to do 3D games at that point. They were very, very much sort of fledgling. It was a fledgling sort of technology, I suppose, at the time. And but there was one company called Argonaut Software, which had released a couple of 3D games, which were very successful on the Amiga and even on the Spectrum, actually. And I applied to them, did an interview, got rejected because I was only showing them like my 2D games that I've been making. Then I went back, and while still carrying on with my A-levels, which are like the exams in the UK, I knocked up a 3D demo on the Amiga and sent that in. And then Jez San called me the next day. He was the boss of Argonaut, and said, okay, do you want a job? And you can start next week. So I quit school and just leapt into the fray, dove straight in,
It's amazing. I mean, it's because I associate you so much with just Q Games and kind of the more Japanese culture, and especially, and what I'm really excited to talk to you about, many things, of course, but you're kind of like at the origin of the Japanese indie scene too, which is so fascinating to me, and I want to talk about that. But I don't think, and I had forgotten about this, like you worked on, and I was thinking about this actually just more recently, is Star Fox 2 specifically, and that must have been so fun for you to have seen that finally come out when the SNES Classic came out in 2017. They released it a la carte, I think last year or 2 years ago. So what was your experience like working over there and kind of being able to straddle that line and get your feet wet, especially working on some of this amazing IP that you would have revisit later, but that must have been pretty formidable for you.
Yeah, I mean, so, I joined Argonaut. A year later, I was flown to Japan to Nintendo, and that's when I met Miyamoto and all the people at Nintendo. And that's what kickstarted the whole Star Fox deal as well, right? So I'd made a 3D demo on the Game Boy by that point when I was at Argonaut, and Nintendo had seen it. They pulled me over, and I came in and I arrived in Kyoto, and I was 18, and it was just, this was in 1990, and it just kind of blew my mind. It was so much more exciting than say London even, at that point. neon lights everywhere, loads of people just milling around, loads of restaurants, like ridiculous amounts of restaurants and people, and I just really kind of liked the place. Um, then we made Star Fox, and so it took that was a couple of years later. We got to the end of that project, but by then I'd got really kind of integrated into the whole Japanese sort of culture, and I just really loved the way of thinking and the sort of attention to detail and stuff like that.
Y-
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
please. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna ask. I wanted to back up and just ask you about that specific thing because a lot of people, especially especially out here in the West, people that become really obsessed with Japanese culture, they learn the language, they want to go over there, they live there. Everyone knows people like that. Was was that part of the intention, or did it kind of go in reverse, where you found yourself at Argonaut, then they sent you over to Nintendo, then you found yourself in love with Japanese culture, and therefore learned the language, stayed, did all those kinds of things.
Yeah,
So did it work more like that?
yeah, it was a complete reverse for
Yeah,
me. So I had no idea what I was coming into,
I
and I
bet
thought it
not.
was kind of like when I was arriving on the plane that first time. I still remember thinking to myself, I don't actually know much about Japan. Am I flying into a country like China? Is this like a communist country? Or I had no idea. I had no idea what I was flying into. I'd seen some TV shows in the 80s that highlighted weird, crazy, Japanese TV shows. But that was about the level of my kind of knowledge. I'd never eaten sushi or anything like that. So it
and
was quite an eye opener.
and especially at that time, I mean, that's such an early seminal period. I always tell people, my friend's dad went away to Japan for business in like 1990 or 1991, and he came home with what we ended up finding out many years later was Arkanoid on Famicom with a thing that you would jam into the NES to make it play
All right.
Famicom games, and we just had no. We didn't know what the hell it was. Like we thought it
Yeah,
was like
yeah,
some unofficial thing. It was so mystical, and it went many years until we realized, oh, this is a thing from Japan. It was just this, like you said, this other place. And so when you were there at such a seminal and fascinating time, what was it? Do you remember meeting Miyamoto for the first time, or what interacting with him was like?
yeah.
I mean, that must have been rarefied.
Yeah, yeah. So actually, the first night we arrived, Miyamoto and Izushi, the guy who was kind of behind the Game Boy, who worked with Yokoi-san, they came to the hotel to like greet us because it was so rare to have people coming over from. There was a guy from Nintendo America with us called Tony Harmon, and there was us, and I'm like an 18-year-old kid, and then my boss Jez San, he was only maybe 23, so very very young,
Right.
very very young, and so they came and met us in the lobby, um, and we kind of had a drink and a chat, uh, just an initial kind of like greeting thing
Yeah.
before the formal meetings the next day, where we actually showed off what we were making and stuff like that.
And how does it such a young, 23-year-old, 18-year-old, how does such a young studio, I guess not a young necessarily studio, but a studio run by young people, um, at a time when Nintendo was notoriously insular, and weird about a lot of things. How does that even get set up? I mean, what is that? What is that kind of connection? Because you didn't hear. We often
Yeah,
lament like we didn't even realize maybe at the time we were playing almost nothing from the West, at least on NES and later SNES, and it's so fascinating. I always assumed until I was a little bit older that Star Fox was. I was like, there's another game from Nintendo. You don't really know.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
it's so how does a deal like that get brokered to begin with?
Uh, really, it was all down to Tony Harmon. Really, I think so. He had just joined Nintendo and he was trying to make a mark. And Nintendo America was still very small at that point. Really, no real development. There's no development over there. But it was really kind of more of a distribution company, or a marketing company, I suppose. And he wanted to make a mark like at at the kind of the home base, like in Japan. He wanted to like show something back to Japan, and he basically scouted, what we were doing at Argonaut, and then just basically really sold it up the river, like in a
Awesome.
good way,
Yeah,
in a
no,
good
that's
way to
awesome. Yeah.
to Nintendo, and he was very kind of like aggressive in trying to get people to meet. So he would be arranging all the flights, he'd be paying for it all via Nintendo America, but like he wasn't kind of letting probably Nintendo Japan have that much of a say in whether whether to meet or not. Right? He was just saying, "Here, I'm bringing these people over. You're going to meet them." That kind of very, very get up and get them kind of attitude.
Yeah, and the work was there to impress them, and obviously, Star Fox is like one of the platform's most beloved games, as we all know. I am
And
interested. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
oh,
please.
sorry, but also Jez San shouldn't be underplayed either. So he was very, very aggressive in trying to get technology or trying to like make money using technology. At least I think that was probably his main goal. But he was very, very. He was also very aggressive. So the combination of those two was very, very powerful. I think at that point.
And so you work on these these Super Nintendo games, and I know you find your way to PlayStation a little bit after this. But what's kind of going on with? I'm just again I'm trying to like figure out like where Dylan is himself personally. Are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
are you becoming fluent with the language? Are you becoming very enamored at this very early period? Did you want to go home? I mean, where's your mind at this point?
I wanted to work out a way to basically live and work in Japan at that point. Immediately after getting back from that first week, I was like, okay, so how do I get back there? Because that
Right.
was a lot of fun. It was exciting, right? And also, Nintendo showed me really that games development could be a profession, like a proper profession, in the sense that all these people I'd met at Nintendo were so focused on making games, and they're all Nintendo was a big company, so it's like they had like meeting rooms and all this kind of uh, corporate type stuff, I suppose. But in the UK, it was still very much a kind of garage industry. So Argonaut was working out of a house, like a semi-detached house in northwest London, and I was like in the attic room hacking together stuff, to do stuff on the Game Boy. So it's a very, very different world, very, very different. And I think that combination or that kind of like freshness really appealed to me. That it was, and what I really wanted to do is like focus on making games. So I just wanted to make games and more games and more games. And I saw Nintendo or Japan as being very focused towards that and been very successful at doing that. Whereas in the UK at that point, there weren't that many big successes. There were some games that sold well, but they weren't like they were tiny companies. Like
Right.
4 people or 5 people, very small. It's a very small business.
It's interesting to hear that too, because I know that developers, publishers, etc., that everyone seems to work in just different environments really well. You think about Moon Studios, which has never been together or whatever, and then you think about these studios that have to delay their games 2 years because it has disrupted their entire flow during COVID. And so it's really interesting to kind of hear the difference between those, the British culture, which I think is a little bit more akin to the indie scene in the United States now, and what was going on in Japan, which is much more business-like. And I'm always fascinated by that. When I've gone to Japan and come home, I've always told people just in my very brief interactions with the culture, like, man, this is a culture that has a lot of pride no matter what it's doing, and a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
focus on doing things the right way. And man, that's like something you can really learn from. And so it's cool that you brought that to bear. And I'm wondering, when we come to the mid 90s, um
yeah.
by the way, I'm moving, you've done a lot. I'm moving quickly to respect
That's
your
fine.
time and all of that. So I just um but how did you, I assume Star Fox, let me back up and say it like this. I assume Star Fox and Star Fox 2, although no one saw it at the time,
Mm,
this must have been pretty impressive in the programming scene, right? I mean, this game, I remember being blown away by this game when I was a kid, by the way it looked. I still can't really believe the SNES did that kind of thing.
mm.
And I feel like people get into game dev, like I got into game dev by writing, but I think most people get into it with design or programming or art. So you come through it with this particular silo of programming. So this must have made a name for you, right?
Yeah, it made to some extent, but there was no internet back then.
Right.
So I remember being a little bit disappointed that I couldn't see any of the like what was going on when we launched. For example, I could see it in Japan. I go to the shop and could buy the game, but I never really saw all the fun and all the fun that was going on in America and even in the UK because Star Fox launched Nintendo UK, so it's a huge thing in the UK as well. So I kind of missed out on that. So there's no internet, so there's no real way to kind of spread your name, I suppose, in that sense. But there was. towards the end, the internet was beginning to kind of show up a bit, and there was Newsnet, uh, and the way this kind of segues into the PlayStation stuff, but the way I found the job at Sony was through a Newsnet post from a producer there. I can't remember his name now, but uh, he he had basically posted and said, "We want people to come and work for us to make PlayStation games." And the PlayStation had just come out, and I was really impressed because I really liked Namco in the arcade, and Namco made all these games like Ridge Racer and all this stuff for it. Although their PlayStation version of Starblade wasn't very good. But the original arcade version was amazing. So I really wanted to basically program the PlayStation. It was clearly very good at 3D, very fast, and so I sent the guy a mail from Usenet, and he was like, "Oh yes, okay, okay, let's set up an interview." So he flew me over to America a few months later, and I did an interview and met the people at a very early PlayStation days. So this was 90, probably 95 when I had the interview. It was 1995, so very very early PlayStation days. I don't think even they'd reached 1 million PlayStations in the US at that point, because
It's
they had a party for that after I joined. I remember the party clearly.
that's awesome. And this is the game that would end up becoming Blasto, I assume, or like what the project would be
Yeah.
that you would end up coming on. Now, when you were being interviewed and hired at this moment, did they know that this is what they wanted to do, something with Phil Hartman and rest in peace and all the
Yeah,
rest, or so talk to me a little bit about that.
yeah. Phil Hartman came in a lot later, so they were looking for the voice, but it was a pretty good match, I think, for
Yeah.
that voice. But it was Blasto. So and originally, so the producer who hired me actually quit PlayStation after that. I went to work for someone like, I think, maybe Sega or something, because it wasn't clear at that point. It wasn't clear that PlayStation was going to be the winner. Between the Saturn and the PlayStation.
Right, in those early days.
Um,
Sure.
yeah, and like people like Bernie Stolar, who was running PlayStation at that point, he quit and went to Sega. He kind of went back to Sega, I think. And so there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of churn over, and people were kind of weren't sure, weren't sure if it was going to be that big. I don't know if you probably do, but like the PlayStation had what was that weird Polygon Man thing, right?
Oh yeah, I
In
saw him in
advertising.
PlayStation All Stars. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I can't remember his name. I'll look it up. Yeah.
So they had those weird campaigns and stuff, and they were really just trying to sell this brand new product, right, with a kind of unknown brand. No one heard of PlayStation. Uh, but in Japan, I'd seen kind of a lot more of the PlayStation, I suppose. So I felt in my gut that the PlayStation. I mean, sorry to Saturn owners and people who like Saturn, because it's a good games machine,
Sure.
but the PlayStation just seemed to have a little bit more oomph to it, and that was why I chose to go there at that point. And so I went to, they introduced me, and they were beginning to make Blasto, so they had a few sketches and stuff, and they had nothing else, no programming whatsoever. I'd be the first programmer coming in to do it. Then I have to try and build the team up from scratch and try and make the game in I don't know what the original schedule was. I think they maybe thought it was going to be made in a year. I don't know, but it was like, yeah, right, just me, an artist, and an animator. That's how it started, and a producer. Unfortunately, it's a really sad story, but the producer who interviewed me for Blasto, not the guy who was on Usenet, he died the week. I shouldn't laugh. It's a long time ago, but he died the week before I joined.
Oh wow.
Because he was on his honeymoon in Mexico, and he'd been climbing some sort of gold frame or something, and it fell and collapsed on him or something like
Holy
that.
shit.
And so I joined PlayStation, and within a week they were saying, "Oh, do you want to be the pallbearer for the producer?" And I was like, "Whoa!" And I was in America, and it's all new. But I just got my head down and started programming. Building an engine up to do stuff on the PlayStation.
And so, by the way, I did look at it. The Polygon Man is the official name. I didn't realize by
Yes.
the same firm that made the famous 1984 ads for Apple. So
Oh,
pretty
really?
auspicious. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's interesting. Maybe a little bit
Yeah.
not as good,
Hello.
but yeah, but good enough. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting.
so I can't. It's Chiat Day or Chiat Day. I don't know how to say that name,
Okay.
but that's the advertising agency. So you had this really interesting experience at a very so you're in your 20s here,
Yeah.
worked in your home country and of the
Yeah.
UK or your home territory there. Then you moved to Japan and you're there for a little while. Now you're in the US.
Yeah.
And what was
In
it like?
California. Yeah.
California, yeah. Well, I lived there for 13 years, totally different. I live in Virginia now, totally different place from where I am now, but very unique. And I'm curious,
Yeah.
what was it like there? You were talking a little bit about the workmanship of Japan and maybe the more casual nature of Britain. What was kind of the takeaway from your time working in the States?
Yeah, that was interesting. I enjoyed it. There are only I felt maybe that people, I'm not sure why, but the work felt a lot harder in California, like a lot longer hours, which is weird. You kind of think it'd be the opposite, right? But
Yeah,
Nintendo wasn't that bad for hours really. There are a few crunches and stuff, but it wasn't um, too bad. But in America, something about the corporate nature maybe of business in America uh, kind of made it feel like you kind of have to be really, really competitive. So it's very aggressively competitive.
yeah,
Um,
I know what you mean.
and yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was a very. I mean, I enjoyed it because I was young. I don't think I'd enjoy it now, but back then I was young, so it was fine. I could take anything, take anything on. And I enjoyed it. So suddenly I was in this very kind of bigger world, I suppose, even more so. It's very, very corporate. The cubicles and the kind of grey, partitions and the uh, were kind of balanced with the kind of more relaxed nature of the, like, say, working hours, for example. We could like nip out to go to Fry's, the electronics store.
Sure.
It's gone now, I think, but
Yeah, it is.
um, yeah. But back then it was, quite a fun place to go. We pop out for like long lunches to go and do that kind of thing, and then come back, and then we'd be working like into you know the the wee hours of the morning. But it was very exciting, and we managed to do a lot of stuff, a lot of technology research, and just kind of enjoyed ourselves. And that whole group, that whole team, we were all friends on Facebook, and every now and then we just every year or so we just kind of have these massive nostalgic threads where we remember all the incidents, some of which are a bit dangerous,
Sure.
not very, yeah, we didn't really, yeah, there are a lot of things, and it was just kind of fun, like the whole, a little bit wild maybe in that sense, but also very hardworking as well. So we kind of worked hard, played hard, and we were all kind of in our young, early 20s or late 20s. I don't think there were really any people above that age group.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like IGN and rolling in at work at 10 or 10:30 and then going to 2 hour lunches, but then you're at the office until midnight and then you do it all
Yeah,
again. But I couldn't work those hours anymore. But certainly
no,
seemed
no.
natural at that time for me. Um, so Blasto comes out April 1998. So this is a first party game. A lot of people kind of forget about this one, not because it was like it was a well received game, and Phil Hartman, like people loved Phil Hartman in it. I think they forget
Mm,
that it's a Sony like IP because it was unthinkable for so long that they would ever revisit it. That it's almost been like it's like some it's kind of like Colony Wars or like some of these games where it's like, oh, you kind of just forgot that this thing existed. But I
mm,
I remember I didn't own it. I remember I was poor at that time. I was a little kid, but I remember renting it and really enjoying it. And then it's one of those third person kind of platformers that is of the
yeah,
era. um how do
and it's
you I'm
also,
sorry, please go
yeah.
ahead.
Uh, it's interesting because you mentioned Phil Hartman there. Of course, he died before it released, like 2 weeks before it released, and so that project in general is kind of like it began with a death and ended with a death.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like a
interesting.
almost like a tragedy play kind of
Right.
thing. But it really bonded us. The whole game bonded us, and the response was really good as well. I think the game was a bit too difficult, to be honest. It was a bit of a throwback to like games in the 1980s on like the Spectrum or
Sure.
the Commodore 64. Like, it was a bit of a throwback to that. It had a hardcore live system, um, which uh, had uh, which had an underlying continue system, but there were a limited number of continues. So you just basically had you know like 9 lives basically in
Right.
effect.
Yeah,
Because of that.
it reminds me. I mean, I was born in 1984, so I grew up with the NES and then later the SNES, and I always lament that I was way better at games when I was 10 than I am at. I'm 36 now. I can like barely play half these games anymore, and I used to just be much more agile and and all of that. But so this game comes out in '98. Q
Yeah,
Games is founded in 2001. So
yeah.
what happens in between? Are you does Sony want to continue to work with you? Are you eager to get back to Japan? Are you perhaps trying to use your connections with Sony to work with them in their home country at this point? Obviously, you have your connections with the Nintendo. You revisit them first before getting back to PlayStation. So I'm curious what's happening in this late '90s, early 2000s period with you.
Basically, I wanted to get back to Japan. I enjoyed the 3 years in California. It was fun. It was a good experience, and I learned to drive because you have to drive.
Sure.
And that was good. That was good. It's good to get that out of the way. Um, and I met a lot of people who are still friends now. So it's good for networking, good for getting to know a lot of people in the games industry as well. But I just really wanted to be back in Japan. Really, that was kind of like where my heart was, I suppose. So I asked them if they could transfer me to the Tokyo office, and they said yes. So I did an interview with the Japan office, the Tokyo office, with Shu, Yoshida
Of course.
san,
And do you
and
speak Japanese at this point? Because Shuhei is fluent in English. So are you speaking to him in English, or is are
I'm yeah, I was in. I still wasn't too. I wasn't like totally fluent at that point, but I was actually. I could conversational. I could do conversational Japanese,
right
and
on?
I'd always been learning right from the start. I bought books. There was no internet kind of to help you learn back then, so I just bought books and read books to try and
That's incredible. Just
learn.
because it's like it's all different characters and pronunciations and all that. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's quite
I
hard.
always we do these ads sometimes for Babbel, which is like a language learning thing, and I say
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
took French for literally 7 years, including 2 years in college, and I can like barely
yeah,
understand it because I don't know what the hell I was doing because we were also learning it out of books. But anyway, so yeah, talk to me a little bit about that time. You meet with Shuhei, you end up going back to Japan,
yeah,
and now you're there to stay. So now you're that's
yeah.
is that
So
fair?
so I'm back there, and I start working on the PlayStation 2 before it gets announced. So it's really, really early days, and I knock up. Well, they say, well, Kutaragi was saying that he doesn't want to see any polygons in the demos we're making, and so I was thinking, well, the graphics chip is it renders polygons. There's not much you can do about that.
Right.
But what I did is I made I thought about how to render those or create those polygons on the fly. So they're not created by an artist, and all the artist creates are B-spline curves and stuff, and then it all gets broken down in the program and in real time and gets rendered that way. And so that's what I did. So in about 6 months or so, uh, I began on a PC actually, prototyping on a Voodoo. I think it was a Voodoo 2 card at the time, and I got like the basic technology running at about 5 FPS, about 5 frames a second. But it was working, so it was rendering curved surfaces, and it was all um, going quite well. And then I got the prototype. They called it the GS Cube, I think, at that point, but it was just a big box which only had the graphics chip in it for the PS2, and you had to create the megabytes of command lists and like send them down via like a serial cable into the box, which took about 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how many commands you sent into it. And then you click run, and all it would do is run those commands and display, and that's all it did. That's all this thing did. But I got that working, and I got the code all translated, working on to generate the graphics side of it, and I had this really cool, curved surface, nicely lit kind of rendering kind of abstract shapes on the screen, and basically at that point, pretty much everybody at PlayStation Japan came and um, came to see that. Like, I was like, what magic are you performing here? And then we said, okay, so how are we going to make this into a demo that runs on the final, or not on the final hardware, on the prototype PlayStation 2 hardware when we don't even have it yet? So we basically said, well, I said, well, I'll write a library that kind of matches to that, and work out a way to make the transition as soon as we get the hardware, to make the transition as smooth as possible. And so I worked on that, and for about a month I made that library. And then the hardware arrived, and we were about 3 weeks away from the presentation on the stage, the revealing of the PlayStation 2. And we only got the hardware like 3 weeks before.
Yeah,
and it was crazy. And so, but I'd made this library. And so suddenly, and it was like a very by the skin of my teeth type thing, but it actually worked. And I got everything running within 2 weeks, with about a week left to kind of work. And it looked amazing. And we got the duck in the bath demo basically running. And the other people around me, there were a couple of other programmers around me, including Mark Cerny, actually. Mark Cerny was in the same room because he was also researching the PlayStation 2 at that point. He wasn't working for Sony at that point. So he was like an independent guy. And so I got that running, and I shared my library to the other people in the room. And so they got their small demos running as well. And basically all the demos you see in that initial presentation for the PlayStation 2 basically came from my library. And then and two of the demos were by me, and then the other programmers did a couple of other demos as well. But it was very 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 exciting time, really. So that pace was incredible.
I love these stories of just making it, just sliding in the home and figuring something out. I love Insomniac told a story about the PS3 reveal when they were saying that the Resistance Fall of Man demo basically crashed 50% of the time, and they did it, and like it didn't crash that time. And it's just like it's like, what? Can you imagine like how calamitous that would have been? So during
that was
E3 2006. Yeah.
So that was Mark Cerny as well.
Yeah, exactly. Who just
yeah.
And now is popping back up more ubiquitously these days, especially since PS4 and Vita.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I noticed that you founded Q Games in the summer of 2001, but your first game doesn't come out until some years later. So what happens in this time? You work on this PS2 demo. The PS2 ends up launching in 2000.
Yeah.
And so are you still at Sony when the console launches as well?
Yeah. So we started making a game that ended up being called Ape Escape 2001. And initially it was going to be a different game, actually. So we initially started doing a demo which had like crowds of animals running around the landscape, and you would kind of run around and trying to round them up, almost like a sheep herder. Or you'd run away from them. We were experimenting. You'd either run away from them or you'd be rounding them up. But then, because of the Ape Escape franchise, we thought, okay, or the producer on the game said, okay, we're going to bring in the Ape Escape characters and make it an Ape Escape game. And we made Ape Escape 2001, or People Saru 2001, it's called in Japan. Which was actually a pretty good game, actually. It didn't, at that point, I think Ape Escape wasn't that popular in the West, unfortunately. So it didn't get a release from Sony. I think it might have got a release from another company, but I'm not sure. But the technology in that game and the just a kind of like Nintendo style fun in that game was actually quite unique for the time for PlayStation.
Sure.
So PlayStation at that time kind of did that cooler kind of games, I suppose.
I would argue, by the way, that's still the case. I don't feel like there are that many Nintendo style, straight up fun games. I think they tried with a few, like Knack was kind of not, things like that.
Mark Cerny again.
Right, exactly. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
He's everywhere.
Stalking you. So you get this game, you get the Ape Escape game out. And by the way, my introduction to Ape Escape was the PS1 original, just because you had to have the DualShock for it, which is just unforgettable. So the game launches and are you thinking at this time that you want to kind of go independent? Because I'm really fascinated by that point.
Hmm.
That's an unintuitive move. I feel like in 2001, I feel like in 2021, that's
Hmm.
the obvious move. I feel like 20 years ago, that's not the obvious move, even for the most, you're starting to build a name for yourself. I mean, even when we were thinking 10 years later, like Inafune leaving Capcom, like, or Iga leaving Konami, we couldn't even believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about where your mind's at, and how you kind of navigated wanting to do something for yourself.
Okay, well, I mean, when I was, so it goes back to like when I was like 13 or 14 and making my own games on the Spectrum. I always wanted to kind of set up my own label or studio, and I'd be like designing logos for these like fictitious companies and stuff, right? And so it's all in my mind. It's always in my mind that I wanted to like make my own studio. It's just from when I was a kid, and at that point, at around 2001, the internal development at Japan Studios was a bit all over the place because Shu had left. He'd left Japan Studios to go and work in America, and he was kind of the core pillar of that Japan studio side of things. And the guy who replaced him uh, was very difficult to get along with. So it's cut it short. He's not there anymore, and he was only there for a few years. Um, but it was very difficult to kind of get on and make stuff. And my immediate boss as well also quit because of all this, all the kind of the politics at the time. And I think it was in a bit of a transition stage at Sony in the Japan studio side of things. And I was thinking, well, if I'm going to go down to Kyoto, because that's where I really wanted to live, not Tokyo, uh, and there isn't a branch of Sony down there, and I don't really want to go and work for Nintendo. It just wasn't really in my plan. Um, and I want to kind of continue what I'm doing now. So what I did is I went to uh, one of the higher level people at Sony, and I said, uh, "Can you give me a small budget, and I'll go down to Kyoto and I'll start a studio to make this game?" And I had like a game presentation set up, and he basically said, "All right." This is the same guy who enabled, like, say, Polyphony to break out as well.
Okay,
So it's
so
the same executive,
cool.
and he was a pretty cool guy. He's retired now, but he's a pretty cool guy, and he helped set up that and kind of gave me the go ahead of that, and that's when I kind of so I took a couple of people from my current team at PlayStation at that time, and I took them down and brought them with me to set up the studio.
So that first of all, it's funny because you're setting up that story as if they're going to be like, oh, we don't want to give you any budget. You always hear
No, no, they go.
that story could have gone one of two ways. So I'm glad
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
glad it
yeah,
went that way, and of course a nice touchstone to Polyphony as well, like you said.
yeah.
Gran Turismo devs, for those out there, I think everyone knows that's listening to this show. So, um, how does this go on? Because you're sent there, but the game never, I guess, materializes, or
Yeah, so we were aiming for a PlayStation 3 game at that point, you
okay,
see. So I was always wanting to do the next like level of technology,
right, of course.
and in 2000 we were doing a PlayStation 3 game in 2001. So it's quite we're a bit too early, really.
Right.
And the game and the technology was actually going along quite well, but we still hit this problem where the guy that I didn't get on well with, I won't mention his name, he was still kind of like looking after our project at Sony, right? So he just wasn't very positive, shall I say? And I had a lot of trouble dealing with him. And after about a year, we just decided to go our own ways. But I was still heavily hooked up to the people I really liked at Sony. So we basically started doing hardware related stuff or research for new stuff that's coming along, and that got us involved in, say, the PlayStation Portable, the PSP,
Mhm.
and also the Vita and the PlayStation 3. And even before that, we actually worked on authoring tools, like a sort of like a kind of like a Unity, I suppose, like a version of Unity. Not Unity didn't exist, I don't think, back then, but it was kind of a similar kind of idea that would let you make like mini games and stuff for the what they had was it's called the PlayStation BB, and it was like a PlayStation. I think BB. I don't know what BB stood for, but it was a modem dial-up PlayStation, and so that's where the first PlayStation 2 kind of online games came about
Interesting.
in Japan. It was only out for a very short period of time, but we were making basically a tool for that that let let game developers and publishers make kind of like mini games or mini presentations.
God,
And
we
kind of
miss out on all the, not all of it, but a lot of the cool stuff. You know, like Satellaview, 64DD. Now we
yeah,
find out we have
yeah,
this thing, and no, almost no one had Net Your Rosie out here, and all that kind of stuff. It's
yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah, yeah.
it's interesting to hear that, and it's hysterical that you were working on something so early on PS3. Do you remember what that project was? Are you at liberty to say like what kind of
Yeah,
game you were doing?
it was called Stasis, but it involved a auto-generated world. Do you remember Spore? Right?
Yeah,
It
of
was
course. Yeah, yeah.
so before Spore was announced. Even we were working on a similar concept. Basically, it wasn't quite as universe kind of expanding, but it was like the planet part. So
Cool.
we created an auto-generated planet. You had these creatures and foliage and weather systems, and it's all simulated. Um,
What was that?
and it
Was
went
Will
well.
that was Will Wright, right? And that did
I think it
Spore.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
that time, yeah,
So it's kind of
yeah,
like Spore almost meets like No Man's Sky in a way. Like you were quite ahead of
yeah,
your time with a lot of the
a little
and
bit.
also back then procedural generation was not. There were games like Azure
No,
Sky or Azure Dreams rather and Dark Cloud and stuff, but a lot of games weren't doing that. So that's again another interesting little wrinkle into your story. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm
and it
sorry. Go ahead.
looked good. I mean, it actually looked good. We had it all running on at that point prototyping on PC. I think on like back then it'd be like GeForce threes, the GeForce 3 Ti or whatever, whatever the latest graphic card was at the time. And it looked great. We had these they were generated in real time, so nothing was pre-generated. It would also create these citadels and stuff, and there's some remnants of that, I suppose, in one of our recent releases, PixelJunk Raiders. So we took a few of those ideas and kind of reworked them a bit
Awesome.
20 years afterwards. But yeah, it was pretty cool. We actually ended up doing a demo of that for Microsoft as well, like with a launch consideration for the Xbox 360.
Cool. Yeah, and they needed downloadable games at that time for sure.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and because there's the Xbox Live stuff, as the audience might remember, on the original Xbox used to come on a disc, which was
Yeah,
ridiculous. But
yeah.
that's the way it went. So you're in Kyoto. Obviously, this project doesn't materialize, but you find your way somehow. I mean, maybe not somehow, but maybe sensically back to Nintendo because you're in the same place now, right? I mean, and you
Yeah,
find
yeah.
your way back to specifically Star Fox.
Mm,
So was that Q Games is, other than your research and kind of support roles, which a lot of devs do, of course, was that
mm.
like your first? Was that like the first big project you guys were really able to get, pardon the pun, but get off the ground?
Yeah, that was the first big project. We had DigiDrive that we'd finished for Nintendo before then, which is like a puzzle game of the game that we'd come up with. We'd come up with an idea. I went and demoed it to Miyamoto, and he really loved it. So we went ahead and made that. And we had a few experimental games before then that we worked with Nintendo on as well that just didn't see the light of day. But they were like Miyamoto's kind of pet projects. So we kind of fiddled around with them for a bit. Not all his projects, see the light of day. We have a couple of those in our history.
Sure.
Um, yeah. So
By the
we
way,
yeah
making something that Miyamoto's impressed with, that must give you some powerful ego energy. Even if you check it, I would imagine I'd feel pretty good about myself. But I digress.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you anyway. So what's next?
So after that, we did DigiDrive. Then we started Star Fox Command, um, and Miyamoto said, he wants it all to be like Star Fox 2, or use the ideas that were in Star Fox 2 in some way. So that's why we went with more of a sort of strategy kind of side of game. And that was a defining game for us. I think it was just a lot of fun to make. It was original, so we weren't copying really any other game. We were using the characters and the world settings, but the actual gameplay itself was very original. And I think we just kind of we really enjoyed that. Really got into the swing of that. And after that, it was still a bit of a way off, but there was the 3DS was incoming, I suppose, and we had about a year where they couldn't yet tell us what that would be, what its gimmick would be, and they said, "Well, can you come up with like I don't know 6 or 7 game ideas, and we'll pick 3 of them, and you can make them." And so for DSiWare, and so we did, and we came up with 6 or 7 ideas. I went and presented them to Nintendo, and they basically picked 3 of those. And at the same time, I said, "Well, can we remake? I also want to remake the game that I made originally with Nintendo called X." And I ended up making in America it's called Xscape, and that was just a fun time. Probably in about a year or just over a year, we made 4 games. A couple of them were smaller games,
Right.
and then 2 of them are quite big. But for DSiWare, so not a great amount of people have played those games, but I'm actually very proud of how they came out. They're really good, solid games.
I loved DSiWare. I mean, that was that our DSi. I love DSi itself. I remember very clearly going and getting it, that matte black one, and
Oh yeah,
and it was like the first iterative machine. Like or not really the first, but the first in an era where we started to accept it. Right, like PS4
yeah.
Pro would come later, and all the Xbox Series X and all
Mm.
that. But I really do want to ask at this point too, and this is it kind of goes back, but and we'll move
Mm.
forward as well. What is
Yeah.
it like being kind of a Westerner? You're a white guy in Japan making these games and setting up a studio and hiring. Did you find that was an advantage for you because you kind of could speak to different cultures literally and maybe get the best kind of quality of help that you need for your specific games? Or was that a barrier in a country that, at least in the West, comes off and has a reputation of being pretty closed off to foreigners at a deeper
Uh,
level than just visiting and being?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did that go?
Actually, I've never experienced like the closed off side of Japan at all. So from the very day I arrived, it was always very open, very friendly, and so really starting the company here, I didn't hit any problems at all. Really, I mean, it was great because I had the double advantage of being able to kind of be a little bit unique. So we stand out. People remember us a lot more easily,
Sure.
and also finding engineers like from the West. I could entice them, and artists. I could entice them to come to Kyoto a little bit more easily than I could if I was a Japanese company. A Japanese face, I suppose, because it's not quite as alien.
Yeah, it's kind of like a stepping stone in a way. Like you don't
Yeah,
feel.
yeah,
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
yeah. And so I think we actually had a pretty good advantage from all that. And then of course I had more Sony roots, and that kind of helped us do get really interesting work with Sony. That's how we got to do like the PlayStation 3 XMB, the wavy background and the music visualizers on the PlayStation 3 were all us. And so we kind of, it was a really interesting kind of like way, or really interesting balance, I suppose. And it worked pretty well for us, I think.
And I could be mistaken because I'm looking at your list of games now. You guys have never worked with a publisher outside of first parties, right? Am I wrong with that?
We have right now.
Or you're working with
We
Apple
have
now, right? And Google.
or Konami
Konami. Oh, okay. Oh, you're also working with
So
Konami. Okay.
so we made Frogger for
Oh,
Konami.
that's right. And that was in 2019. Was that in 2000?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Cool. So that's right. That's right. Because they just were in the news because they're now offering up all their IP. And
Yeah, I saw
my
that. Yeah.
dev, I own a small team. And we were like, shit, we would love like Gradius or something. And then so we had
Yeah.
we Google translated into like Japanese only. I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
So I just thought that just came to my mind that you have this, I guess, more recent, but you're kind of bouncing between the first parties. Did anyone show interest on either side in acquiring you guys at any point?
Not really. It doesn't really happen that much in Japan, I think. Maybe if we were in the West, that could have happened. But in Japan, you don't really hear much. There isn't really. You don't really hear much about like people buying companies here. You hear about people like breaking out from the big companies here, but
Right.
not so much the opposite.
Yeah, that's interesting, I guess, because it is such a different corporate culture that I guess people would want to work in the opposite.
Yeah.
And you see that obviously from Capcom to Platinum to Tango Gameworks, and people kind of splitting out further and further from that, and so on and so forth. So that is interesting. I'm wondering, I guess how how did you get back with PlayStation and begin this PixelJunk journey? I guess because what I'm fascinated by with you, or not with you for sure, but with this series is
Hmm.
I consider myself a scholar of PlayStation. People might think that's crazy. It is incredibly weird that you worked with Sony as a second party, and it doesn't seem like they give they don't mind you using the Pixel Junk name. Like, there's a story about how like Playdead pitched them Limbo, and like they turned Limbo down because they didn't want to give them the IP and all of that. So this is really unique.
Right.
Is that also born from you guys being in Japan, where maybe you worked out a different kind of deal? Because I'm so shocked.
Uh,
When I saw you,
yeah,
I'm looking
yeah,
at the
yeah.
list. When I saw Pixel Junk, what was it? I guess it was Pixel Junk. Oh yeah, Pixel Junk Monsters 2. When that came to like Switch and everything, I
Hmm.
was like, really? I didn't even know that that was possible. So how did you find Sony, and how did that relationship kind of become fostered? And how did you retain a name when they wanted everything back then? I mean, a
Well,
lot of developers lament that, by the way.
well, a lot of people don't realize, but the Pixel Junk series is funded entirely by us. So PlayStation Santa Monica Studios, they published it in the West, um, but they didn't actually. They funded certain parts of it, like they funded the QA and the localization, but that's it. And the whole, so we were actually truly independent, where a lot of the other independent games companies probably weren't quite as independent as
So you
us
did
back
like a
then.
third party, what ended up being a third party exclusive.
Mm,
Um,
basically, yeah,
and
yeah.
was that done like the help from XDev to port it and all of that? Was that basically like a wink, or not a wink and a nod, but a handshake agreement to say like we will make it an exclusive at that point, even though we own it? Was that kind of how?
It was kind of, yeah. It was
Yeah,
a I wanted, because it was all new territory for us, because we hadn't really released our own game before. The PSN was very fledgling at the time, and the only reason we were making games for it was because we'd done the PS3 XMB, and we'd been told early on that there was going to be this like PSN store, and like it could allow people like us to actually make our own games for it and release them ourselves. Um, and so we kind of, so I wanted help reaching the Western audience, right? Because I had, back then the internet wasn't, there was no Twitter, there's no social media back then.
right.
Um, not any to speak of really. So we wanted a way to kind of reach everybody. So that was part of the deal. So I gave them a limited time exclusive. It wasn't 100%
Hmm.
exclusive. And um, in return, they also, they paid for the QA and the localization, but then everything else was us. So it's all fully independent, kind of
So you decided
third party game.
so you could have brought Pixel Junk to um other consoles at that time and just chose not to do that. Was that out of
Yeah,
respect, or was it like for the relationship, or
it's
or
because I don't.
yeah.
It's because in general I don't like to kind of dwell on previous games. I don't want to like, I'm not really a multi-platform person, I suppose. I you know I like to make a game for a particular platform, and then that's the game
And
on
then you
that
move
platform,
on.
rather than,
Right.
and then I move on, because I like making games. So I like making new games, and I don't really want to keep making the same game over and over, like forever.
I've noticed
Um,
that about the Pixel Junk series, which I think is
yeah, yeah,
obviously the the hallmark of it. So we have a lot of different games, right? Racers,
yeah,
Monsters, Eden, which I think you followed up more recently.
yeah. Eden
And
2 on the Switch. Yeah,
right. And then Shooter, which I loved. I loved Shooter on Vita. I thought it was the perfect place
yeah.
for
It's
it.
quite well done. Yeah.
Yeah, very well done. And then
Mm.
you side scroller, and then 4 a.m., which is actually how I got or Will reached out to me. Your over at Q Games, your Will,
Yeah, yeah,
and because I was actually just reading, because I read your interview with about the Tomorrow Children that you gave recently, or talked about it, or briefly
yeah.
mentioned it somewhere, and we'll get into that obviously.
For
But
IG in Japan.
right, exactly, yeah, it made its way over here.
Your old workplace.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And so it made its way over here, and so I was reading, and I was like, I literally said out loud, I was like, "Oh shit, Pixel Junk 4am! I had totally forgotten about that game." So
yep,
it just
yeah,
reminded me that there were all these things. Plus, you guys did like Nom Nom Galaxy and all the other stuff.
yep, yep.
So, what is it about kind of that machine gun cadence of getting the different things and not dwelling? I find that as a more fledgling dev now, like we're obsessed with wanting to go back to our old games, because like we're like, oh, we could have done that so much better. We got to make a
Yeah,
sequel.
yeah.
And you've really, I mean, obviously, PixelJunk Shooter got a sequel, etc. Monsters, I think, got a
Mm.
sequel too. But you avoided doing that, and I wonder, like, where is that born out of? Because it's risky. I would assume it's like
Mm.
what I say about Yacht Club, how I respect that, even though it's frustrating. Like, they didn't run Shovel Knight into the ground. I probably would have gotten 7 Shovel Knight games out by now, right? Like,
Right,
we
right.
literally have one still game. So how did you show that kind of restraint in not pursuing that, and also knowing
Yeah.
now, which I didn't know, that you're funding this stuff yourself, so it's a little more
Not. I
dangerous.
mean, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So, um, it's. I think. I think really the essence of a games creator, a games creator, uh, is really to always be like trying to expand what you're doing and finding something new to do. Um, but it's just how I grew up, I suppose. Back in the in the old days, I mean, y- there'd be just so many games in so many genres, and people would be playing them all. And in the modern age, it's a little bit less like that. Um, it's like that in the indie world more, but like in the I don't know the bigger budget world, the majority of game players or people players are playing like the same game, like Fortnite
right,
or
right, of course.
Minecraft or the latest game from Nintendo even, but they'll only stick to the latest game from Nintendo, right? They won't try other games
Right,
on the
which I
Switch.
find totally depressing, but yeah,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
absolutely
So
right. That is the normal gamer.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why actually we initially, at least, we were interested in Apple Arcade, because they kind of gave the impression that they'd just have like a big range of lots of different types of games, and because they weren't being sold individually, it meant that the gamers can kind of get back into that kind of like exploratory kind of phase where they can actually just go and try anything, you know, just see what they like.
Right. That was really, I
Yeah,
mean, the Bosons, I think they're both still there, but the Boson brothers,
yeah,
I worked with one of them at IGN, but the other, they worked at Way
okay,
Forward, and they, just for people that's out there that don't know, I mean, that doesn't surprise me because they have that independent blood like running through them. So that they brought that to Apple, I think makes a lot
yeah,
of sense, and is probably exactly what
yeah,
Apple Arcade needed. Um,
yeah. I mean, that's great, and
yeah,
that idea is great. The consumer, the player, the gamer out there is still a little bit wary, I think, of trying out new ideas. But that shouldn't stop us, I think. So that's my policy, I suppose. It shouldn't stop us from exploring new ideas just because even if people just want the same thing over and over again, that's it's not really our. I don't see it as my job, at least, to give the same thing over and over again. So I see my role as a games creator is to try and find new ways to play games or new ideas or new worlds or whatever, and that's kind of the direction I want to go in, and it's kind of the direction I've gone in the past. I mean, so um, my I suppose my history speaks for that. So we made some games, some of them didn't do too well, some did very well, um, but each game individually is a unique take on something, or like it has some essence of originality in there and something new that we're trying out. Maybe not everybody likes it. Maybe they think it should be more like some other game that's out there. But we don't tend to look at things like that.
I think that's
We,
awesome too because I have a specific memory at IGN of going to see PixelJunk 4 a.m. Was it called
oh yeah,
PixelJunk Lifelike at one point? Right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Originally, yeah, yeah.
So I remember these really specific things that Sony used to do, and it was kind of crazy because 4 a.m. was one of the games that they showed where I think I've told people this. Like I played Until Dawn, for instance, the PS4 game on PS3 with
Right,
in
right.
VR, right? And
Okay.
like with this weird VR, like this thing where they had like a PlayStation Move basically stapled to this
Oh
thing, and
yeah, yeah,
it was wild. And I remember them showing 4 a.m. in the same breath as these experimental games, and I was like, I think I might even wrote about it at IGN. I'm like, this game is not gonna do well. But
yeah, yeah,
but it's interesting that Sony let them, not let them, but afforded them
yeah,
the opportunity to do it. They were at least doing the
yeah,
PR for you for it too. And then,
yeah,
um, and I'm like, it's kind of interesting to know that they probably also know that it's not going to do very well, and that they could easily do Pixel Junk Monsters 3 or whatever. And
yeah, yeah.
so, um, with that in mind, going through all the different games, how did you then find your way to the Tomorrow Children, which is a Sony published game, and that
Yeah,
is
so
how
that's
you and
yeah.
I found each other again. Because I definitely want to get into this. This is when I interviewed you back then, and I was actually reading my story from earlier, like it was in
Yeah, yeah.
2014. I read it earlier today
Very
on
early, yeah.
IGN, and it was like it was talking about the Soviet themes, and I think I named it something like PlayStation's communist exclusive or something. It was an interesting story. Um, this seemed like a broader game, and also a game that, in my mind, was caught in this strange time in PlayStation where, excuse me,
Mm.
especially at San Diego studio, which had nothing to do with your game, but San Diego
Well,
studio
yeah.
was putting out like a bunch of stuff, like obviously Jaffe's game, Drawn to Death, but
Yeah.
also like Guns Up, and these games where they had no idea what to do with them. They had no idea how to monetize them, and they were
No,
just being
no.
sent out to die. And I felt like the Tomorrow Children, and I think I read into what you were saying that I felt like you might have
Mm.
felt the same way. And
Yeah, because their influence was quite strong at the time as well within Sony.
right,
There's a guy there who was very pro free to play, and I think he got his voice in on one of the internal reviews, and then suddenly we were free to play.
yeah, I mean, because it happened to
And
Killstrain, it happened to you, it happened to
yeah, yeah.
Jaffe's game. It's very, I feel like
But
that
then
your
they
game
did,
is almost the
yeah,
forgotten one in that domino of games that were, pardon my language, kind of fucked by that model.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they kind of then launched the game. I mean, I don't want to talk bad about Sony too much about this, but they did launch the game as though it's a package, like a normal package game, uh, not a free to play game,
right.
where you need to keep bringing people in. Or, you need to at least have a banner on the store for the game, and they didn't even have a banner on the store for us after about a month. And so it was just like, okay, so how do we bring more people in? And we had no real way to do
No,
that.
it's it's the self-fulfilling prophecy of dreams that Media Molecule is experiencing now too, where
Yeah,
if you don't get people in the door, they're not going to be there. If you don't give it exposure, it's not going to be exposed. It's sad to hear that was the same thing with you and the Tomorrow Children.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it was a shame. So I mean, but it came about. So the game originally. So you were asking about how it came
yeah,
about, but this was very early on, before the PlayStation 4 hardware was really in anybody's hands. Um, and basically, Mark Cerny came to visit, and because he was like the architect behind the PS4, and he kind of knew what was coming down the pipe, and he said, "Well, I put all this effort in making this really good graphic chip with all this compute power, and and because it was a very good chip, really, the graphics chip." And he said, the other companies, such as Insomniac or whatever, or Sony, internal studios, whatever, they can't really take any risks. So they can only really use the same technology that they've always used, and just kind of repurpose it and just use the extra, the extra GPU cycles for more polygons, or slightly better lighting, but using the same model, the same ways that they've always done, because they have their pipelines in place. Their animators and their artists can only really work with what they've got, efficiently. That is, they're not going to go suddenly learn this new way to make graphics or games. And he said, well, someone like Q Games could probably do like an original engine that is using the hardware in a completely different way, to get a completely different look of a game. And he knew that we were good at technology, obviously, because I worked in that room with him on the PlayStation 2, Duck in the Bath demo
right.
that was in '98, right? So I kind of known him over the years. And he knew that I really liked to explore new technology. And he said, so let's talk to Alan Becker, who had just joined Japan Studios at that point, and then let's see if we can get you started, building an engine and a game which is actually not like, not using the same pipelines and not using the same old, sort of slightly PC based tech, I suppose, and it's actually using this PS4 GPU in the way that Mark Cerny, I suppose, envisioned it to be used, right? And so that's what we did. And so we started off and we said, well, okay, we want to get a rendered look. or get a very unique kind of rendered look that no one else is really getting. And we just started looking at SIGGRAPH papers and stuff that was really not ready for real time yet. We said, okay, can we make this work in real time? So there's lots of demos and stuff at SIGGRAPH that runs at like 3 FPS, or you have to have like, liquid cooled 4-layered graphics cards to run that kind of stuff. And so we basically found some really cool like techniques that were kind of bubbling up, and one of those was called voxel cone tracing, which is an early form of kind of like a ray tracing system that works through the lighting space, I suppose, rather than the physical space. In a way, it's a bit difficult to describe, but the ray tracing obviously works with like the geometry right of the world, where voxel cone tracing works with a voxelized version of the world that you don't see. So you don't see the voxels, but they're there, and the lighting works and ray traces through those.
Interesting.
And we also wanted to do technology involving CSG, so like geometry that could be changed on the fly, so digging tunnels and that kind of stuff. And we just started building a game idea around this kind of technology. The reason why it's important is because if you dig a tunnel into geometry, using regular tech, even now, regular kind of lighting tech, the light won't bounce into the tunnel. So you have the entrance of the tunnel, and then everything else is dark inside using regular tech. But with ray tracing and with voxel cone tracing, you can actually start getting bounces down into the tunnel. So if you dig a tunnel, the light will go a bit into the tunnel, and you can actually you can make more of a game out of it in that way. It looks better. It's not pitch black in there. You can actually go into the tunnel.
And it's funny that you're talking about gamifying it too, as opposed to talking about how beautiful it might look or anything like that, which I think it shows exactly where your mind is as a programmer.
Yeah. So both ways, right? So we it's like we're trying to get this beautiful thing running, and also we want to put that in a package which is interesting for the player, as well. And because of the because of the cold look we got, I suppose, via this lighting and all the specular and all this kind of stuff, I started really kind of thinking back to like the Cold War and like how I grew up in the UK, but the Iron Curtain was always there, and there's always a sense that the nukes are going to drop at any moment or whatever. It felt very, it was always in the background.
Yeah, especially in Western Europe, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, and we weren't scared, but I mean, it's just always there. But I always had I was always intrigued because it was like a world we could never see at that point, right? So it's like beyond the Iron Curtain, what exists back there? And so TV shows like there's an old 60s cult TV show called The Prisoner, and a lot of Cold War movies, even like Clint Eastwood's the Firefox, for example, where he goes into like Russia and steals a stealth aircraft or something stupid like that, as Clint Eastwood does. But all this stuff, kind of lots of interesting ingredients, and I thought, okay, let's see if I can bring all this in. And also, a lot of the PixelJunk games are about cooperation, right? So Monsters is 2-player co-op, and Eden is 3-player co-op, and Shooter is 2-player co-op. So there's a lot of our games are about cooperation. So I thought, okay, let's expand the cooperation side of things to be even bigger, and have it so every player is cooperating.
It's incredibly ambitious. I mean, did you feel like did you guys feel like you executed on it well enough to, because I didn't review it at IGN, so I have no familiarity with the final product, but do you guys feel like you executed on it well enough to have gotten more shine and more attention? And you feel like, again, I'm not trying to pin you blaming Sony. I'm not trying to say that, but do you feel do you feel like you did everything you could to make this game work?
I think we did within the constraints we had. We did as much as we could. We worked bloody hard on it. But the genre was very different. I think the free-to-play side of things is what really killed us because we actually had a pretty good user base, very active user base, but we couldn't really monetize them very well. Um, so we'd have like 1,000 concurrent users or whatever. That had, we had all these monetization terms
Right.
back then, right? That I didn't really. So but we had all this data, and we had a very good core fan base from all over the world. We had thousands of people in like Saudi Arabia playing the
Hmm.
game for some reason, but like even like also but in Russia and Japan. It was very popular in Japan, and also the ratio of male to female was really good as well, which is quite rare on PlayStation.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. It's always good to
Yeah,
hear.
so yeah, we really appealed to quite a good range of people, um, but we couldn't quite make enough money to cover the server running costs, and the continuing development costs, and that's really the ultimate reason why the plug got pulled, um, because we were kind of rushing to try and find a way to squeeze more money out of people in the game, which is kind of like against my way of thinking. Really, I just wanted people to enjoy the game,
Right.
uh, you know, but of course you know, we were being asked, for it to make more money, and that was kind of the conflict,
Yeah,
that
it's
occurred.
exactly what Jaffe says
You
too.
know?
Like they had enough players, I think, to make Drawn to Death work. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and I remember what I remember notably about the Tomorrow Children too is the very rare got an alpha, didn't it? Like on PlayStation, I remember because it's
yeah,
still
yeah.
in
We
my
had an alpha
download list. Like
test.
when I go look, it's still there, and I think that that's interesting because they can remove it. Like they remove PT from everyone's
Oh,
devices,
okay.
so like it's just there,
Have
and I
you?
think it's a nice little memory. It's got like a date on it and stuff like that. But
Yeah, yeah. You can't run it
no, no.
though.
And so that's the reason for people that don't know. And we had mentioned the IGN Japan interview that made it to kind of hardcore PlayStation folks like us on this show.
Hmm.
I was curious. Um, you were talking about how you're talking to Sony about trying to get that name or the game. Do you want the IP? Do you want the game itself? I mean, and do you think that would? Do you think there's a chance of that happening? Because I can't imagine that it couldn't happen.
Hmm.
But I've often heard it described at Sony like they don't. It's the same thing like when they shut the Vita down. Like they were going to try to shut the Vita and PS3 down. We found out it was going to cost literally 6 figures a year to keep it going. And it's like, are you
Yeah,
kidding
yeah,
me? Like, who cares?
yeah,
And so it's a similar thing here where you think they would do something good and be like, fine, just take it. But I suspect it's not going to work out like that. So I'm just curious. I'm just curious how it's going
yeah,
on your
yeah.
end. Yeah,
Well, I mean, I really want to get the IP back, and Sony are open to talks about it. So I've been talking to them
that's awesome.
about that. Um, you know, when if we do manage to get it back and under not too, and hopefully the terms aren't too bad, of course. Uh, I doubt they'll give it to us for free.
Right.
Then I think we'll be, I'll announce it as soon as I can, because I think all the fans want it. We get, every day on Twitter there are people posting screenshots from it. Even 5 years on, they're still playing. They're still like showing screenshots and sharing and talking about it, from all walks of life, like all countries. It's interesting how it affected a lot of people in a very unique way. I think.
And you had mentioned that you think it maybe one of the things that was in quotes wrong with it was just couldn't play it offline, right? I think that was that one of
Yeah,
the things that you would probably change to just make it because that was what you were saying,
yeah,
like just hinging it on the server might have been a bad idea to begin with because it gave it an end date. So is that's
yeah.
something you kind of want to change as well?
Yeah, if I get it back, I'll definitely remove the free to play and the server side and make it more so you host towns, and you can play with your friends, and you can have like maybe you can even have a private town with your friends, and just make it very much more like the Minecraft model. I think
Sure. I'm trying to
more peer to peer.
I'm racking my brain because it's like has a game ever come out and then gone away and then come back. Like it's this amazing, not like saving it in process, like No Man's Sky, what they did to that, or Rainbow Six
Yeah,
Siege
yeah,
becoming bigger over time. Like this is, I feel like it would be an amazing story for you to get it back, build it back up,
mm,
maybe put it on more platforms, and then like that would because people love a good story like that. I think people would be
Yeah, yeah.
curious about it, and you guys must know that. Just from a curiosity standpoint, you'd probably sell tens of thousands of copies of it at the very least, I would assume.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it'd be I think it'd be cool. And there's a few things in the game we'd change as well. We'd fix it basically a bit, based on all the based on the fact it's not free to play anymore. There's a lot of stuff we can fix, which is great. So I think that's what we do. And then there's a huge nostalgic factor for a lot of fans. But as you say, I think a lot of new people might just try it out, just to see what it's like.
Uh,
If we ever did,
Shit,
you
dude. I
know.
mean, you released it in 2016. So I mean, so Twitch obviously existed at that time and everything, but man, all you need is one streamer, right? I mean, you see that
Yeah,
over and
yeah,
over again, and you guys would be golden. I'm rooting for that. I really hope that happens, and I hope it sets an example too for maybe others, not necessarily with Sony, but to come in and try to get your
yeah,
games back. My
yeah.
developer, we bought all of our Xbox ports back from our publisher because we just wanted to control them.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, we wanted to do it now as opposed to later because we were as ridiculous as it is, we were like, what if we have a big game? Our games sell 10,000 copies or something. It's like, what if we had a
Mm.
big game in the future and then the price just goes up? We might as well just do it now. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
That
so
makes sense.
I'm really rooting for you on this one because I would love for you
Yeah,
to get the
yeah.
IP back. Um, Let me ask you
Well, I
this.
mean,
I'm sorry, no,
so what?
please go ahead.
One advantage, I mean,
Yeah,
that could help us is that the Japan studios kind of like reduced in size.
right. Yeah, they don't
Kind of
exist anymore. It's now a
disappeared.
Sobe or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and Becker,
So I
Alan
think,
Becker, all those guys are gone now. I think so.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So you were saying, how a lot of developers will say it's very difficult to negotiate with Sony for that kind of stuff, but I think I know I can kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel if I push harder. Um, I can't promise anything yet, but I mean, I really want to get it back.
yeah. We're really going to send our positive energies to this because
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think that would be really cool and just a really fascinating story about making a game live again. Um,
yeah, yeah. As you say, it hasn't really happened.
no,
So
I mean, I'd have to
yeah.
really sit, and I don't think so. Maybe someone will have an
Mm,
example. This is the thing I wanted to ask you about, though. Knowing you control PixelJunk and knowing that these games have kind of come to different things, Eden 2, for instance, Nintendo Switch, is there any thought of doing some sort of, and again, I know I'm cognizant of what you said. You don't want to go back, right? But I feel like there are newer PlayStation gamers. Like a lot of people are in our audience. Some of us go all the way back, but
mm,
a lot of people join PS3, PS4, PS5,
yeah.
Vita, PSVR, whatever the case might be. And I feel like they missed some of your games. Is there any, like,
Mm.
what about PixelJunk Anthology, right? Like something like that,
Yeah.
and like getting them all out. Um, I dare say this even on this show because I think some of the audience, they won't really get mad, but shit, man, putting all these games together and getting it on Game Pass as your first Xbox
Right,
game,
right,
right? I mean,
right.
there's so many opportunities here. What is there a do you think that there's a possibility of doing that? Because I feel like I would love to be able to play. I guess there's not really like PixelJunk. Actually, there's really no good example because even Monsters is on Vita. Let's say the original PixelJunk Racers. That's only on PS3
Yeah,
as I
yeah, yeah,
remember.
yeah.
I don't want to go plug my PS3 in. I went and bought Metal Gear Solid 2 on PSN on PS3 like 3 weeks ago. It literally took like an entire day for me to get this thing going. So, have you ever
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
about
yeah.
maybe putting them on, at least bringing them forward to PS4 so that, although many of the games are already on PS4, just so that people
A
can
few of
always have
them are. A
access to
few of them
them?
are. Yeah. Um, Maybe, but not. I think maybe a little bit further on.
Mm.
So just not. We right now we have a couple of games that we haven't announced yet. So we're kind of hard at work developing some new games. So I think that takes priority basically.
Are they
Yeah,
with familiar partners, or are you gonna? Because for the audience that doesn't know,
mm,
I'm reading your stuff right now. We talked about Frogger and Toy Town
yeah, yeah,
earlier, and that was the first of two Apple Arcade games you guys did. You did
yeah,
Eden 2 on Switch last year, and then actually you
yeah.
did Pixel Junk Raiders, which people that are listening to the audio might not be able to see it, but he's wearing a Raider shirt
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
for Stadia. So yeah, there
yeah.
it is. So you're all over. And again, this speaks to your desire to touch a lot of different pieces of technology, which I'm sure you're especially excited about Stadia. Although who knows what's going to end up happening with that? Just a great potential. So
Well,
who
yeah.
are you? So well, are maybe you're not. But are you working with the same partners? Do you want to come back to PlayStation? Are you interested in Xbox? Like, can you tell us anything about that?
I think we kind of at the moment we're doing it ourselves again. I
Sure.
think and we're maybe we're looking into new publishers that are around just to see if they're interested in stuff as well. Um, but I'm trying to find a way really to navigate the waters in a more independent way if we can, and maybe like a little bit of help at the end, as like we did for the original PixelJunk series, where QA and distribution and
Right.
marketing
Yeah,
and
you don't
stuff
have to
like
deal with
that
all the
is
PR
covered.
and the codes and all that
Yeah, yeah, because it
crap.
takes a lot of work to
Sure.
do that
Yeah,
kind of stuff.
we hired an
Uh,
associate producer just to deal with the publishers and all that because it's like all the
yeah,
forms and it's like, oh my god.
yeah, yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and everyone's got their own
Yeah,
different pipelines.
yeah.
So, um, and you're on Apple Arcade, which I find interesting because it's a subscription model. So I wanted to just pick
Hmm.
your brain as an OG dev and someone who's been here. Do you believe in this model? I know it's pretty controversial.
Uh,
Some people think it's a race to the bottom.
yeah.
I feel like it's
Mm.
natural, but maybe
I, th-
dangerous. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not sure really. I think it's one of those things where it will work for some people
Mm,
and not for others. I do like. I mean, obviously Netflix is the same kind of model, right?
right.
For TV shows. And I do like the fact that say so the motivations for Netflix to take on a new show, right, isn't necessarily to give their existing users something to watch. It's to give people who aren't on Netflix yet a reason to join
Mm,
Netflix, which means that the range and the variety of shows uh, can be quite large because they're looking for more niches, you know, to fill.
right.
Right, if you think about it, they want to get everybody onto Netflix, um, and I think Apple Arcade, at least initially, had a similar potential. I maybe think that Apple right now at least haven't quite gone that route. They haven't managed to yet. Uh, I think they're trying to. I just don't think they've quite reached that yet. I
Right.
mean, maybe the branding of Apple is a bit too strong, even for that kind of thing. Um, Whereas Netflix was more like the new kid on the block when they were starting out.
Sure.
Uh, but I think so. I think that if it's done right, what it can do is um, create an audience for games that aren't the standard fare. So people don't have to do like another adventure story based FPS with zombies, or something like that.
Right.
They don't have to do another game that looks like that because that is the only game that can find an audience. That's
Mm,
basically that's how traditional publishing works,
sure.
right? Um, Whereas something like Game Pass or Apple Arcade, perhaps I don't know if it has it yet, but perhaps has the potential to kind of expand that a little bit. Maybe if they approach it in the same way, but if those services start just putting the same old kind of games on, then I think it won't do as well.
Yeah.
I think they should concentrate on really the niche, the niche titles, um, the titles you could not normally find because they don't sell enough in numbers to kind of get eyeballs, to get that reach.
Right.
And there's a lot of good games out there.
Right. It's a really interesting point that this almost acts as like that. Well, like Back for Blood's coming on Game Pass, I think, in a week or two. The Left 4 Dead sequel, like that's going to be a nice supplement to the smaller games that wouldn't necessarily make their money back, but might find an audience. I really like that, and that's you're making the case why you need to be on. You got to go to Game Pass. I mean, you're almost
Well,
making
yeah,
the case.
yeah.
Are you reading me your deck that you presented to them?
No, no. We've occasionally over the years we've talked to Microsoft,
Right.
but uh, and I like the guys over there, but
Yeah, you've never
never
released anything
really,
there, as I was looking.
never
Never.
never
Yeah.
worked with them
Yeah.
apart from that one time on Status
Right.
with the
Right.
first game we made back for there was that one time, but back then it was a very different Microsoft,
Well,
very very different.
it'll be interesting. I'll be keeping an eye. I mean, there's much to keep an eye on here with you now because
Yeah.
and PixelJunk Raiders is this how is this doing? Are you you were kind of a
Well,
little dismissive of the
well,
state,
say
or are you guys kind of
when it all
disappointed that you're that you're there.
Yeah, we launched and then it all kind of shut down, didn't
Right.
it?
Yeah.
So so
So you don't
from
mind
our point of
shooting the shit a little bit on that. Yeah.
yeah, well, I won't. I try not to.
Sure. Well, is that going to come
you know,
to other platforms?
uh, it isn't exclusive, so we can bring it to other platforms.
Cool.
So um,
I'll wait then.
it's just finding the time.
Yeah, of course. And I,
we have so many games in the works right now. We just have to go. Okay, no, we want to do it, but we just have to wait a bit, and then we'll do it.
and I don't know if you're gonna be able to speak to this. I'll ask you this one last question because I noticed that you did, and I remember now Dead Hungry, which was an early PSVR game. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and on Oculus as
on
well,
Right, and on Oculus as
and
well,
Vive.
and Vive.
Yeah,
Are
yeah,
you gonna? Do you want to return to VR? That seems like another nice challenge for you. Is that maybe something you guys are working on?
yeah. I think I like VR, but I think the experiences are limited to the 3D space, right? I mean, they're limited to I don't know, like a physical space, I suppose, right? Because when you're in VR, you're in a physical
Right,
space
right. And
in a
there's
way.
also the problem. So that's interesting. And
It's
also the
virtual. It's
problems
a
of
virtual physical place.
right, and also the problems of
Yeah,
locomotion and all that kind of stuff. I know that some people just have a real
yeah,
hang
yeah,
up on it, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting.
So
Yeah,
I can initially, I mean, I quite enjoyed thinking up things to do in VR, um, but they always tend to revolve around physical, a lot of physical
sure.
motion, obviously, and I don't think all games, we've done that. So it's that thing where I want to do the next thing now,
Right.
the next new thing, and maybe it'll be on VR if our next idea happens to be a good VR kind of idea. But um, right now, at least, I'm not planning any VR stuff, and we have a couple of really interesting kind of different ideas we want to explore. And that's what we'll be pushing forward. But never say never. So it's like it really just does depend on basically what we feel like we want to get on with. What we want to make.
What is your head count right now? I should have asked you that at the top.
We're about 50 people.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We have a nice studio here. I put a lot of effort into making a nice environment. Like a great office. This we're in the music
I was
room.
gonna say you're gonna bust down to a 6 synth concert after this.
Yeah, yeah. So in pre-COVID times, we'd be jamming in here every lunchtime and playing on these keyboards, and
that's fun.
it's a lot of fun. There's a like a vocoder over there, and there's a drum kit just out of view.
Oh, I'm jealous. That's what I play.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is awesome. I hope maybe when you have first of all, I hope that if you do get the Tomorrow Children back, you come back and we can talk
Yeah.
about that even deeper. But
Oh yeah, definitely.
when you're ready to talk about what's next for you, even if it's not on PlayStation, I just find you very interesting. I hope that I'll reach out to Will and hope to have you back. Because I really, I like these conversations, and I like, it's like you said, like everyone, you want to play Call of Duty, you don't want to play whatever people want to play Assassin's Creed. So obviously people want to talk to those people too, but I really don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I'd rather talk. I've had all of that. I want to talk to and there's interesting people that work on those games, of course, but I want to talk to the people that are more in the trenches. And I think that since I started making games, I have just a different perspective on it, that I appreciate the scrappiness. I understand a little bit more of the back end stuff of it. I'm not just bringing in like a journalist insider's view anymore. So as I learn more, I hope that I can pick your brain again in the future, and we can talk shop.
Yeah, sure. I mean, great. I'd love to. If I do get the IP back, I'll be wanting to speak to lots of people and just talk about it a lot.
Sure.
So.
We'll give you all the time you want at that time. And for people that are in in our PlayStation audience specifically, obviously PS3 and Vita stores are still up. So you can get PixelJunk Racers, Monsters Encore, Eden, Monsters Deluxe, which is actually only on PSP, so you won't be able to get that. PixelJunk Shooter, PixelJunk Shooter 2, PixelJunk Side Scroller, which is awesome. I mean, I love a lot of these games. PixelJunk 4AM, then Nom Nom Galaxy, which was a cool game on PS4 from 2015.
That's still very popular, actually.
Yeah, I remember when that game came out, because that was it was not a PixelJunk game, and that was strange at that time. Then PixelJunk Monsters 2 on PS4, and that's it for you guys. So then that's it in quotes for you guys. So Dylan, any closing comments before we go?
No, I mean, I hope some of the people who've played my games, our games here, I hope they really look forward to what we're making next. We have a couple of things in the works, and I'd love to, get them excited again.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean,
to see some new stuff.
I'm sure they will be, and we'll obviously talk about it when you guys announce it. But I appreciate your time. So thank you so much, and thanks to Will.
Yeah, thanks for the chat.
You're very welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks to Will for setting it up as well. And
yeah, maybe we can get Will on next time as well.
yeah, Will can sneak in next time if you like.
Yeah.
And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of Last Stand and all things Sacred Symbols. You've made us the biggest PlayStation podcast in the world, and we very much appreciate that.
Great.
So yeah, thank you. So thank you all out there. Thank you, Dylan, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.